of my story. And I'm going to try and not take forever, but Greg, if at any point you feel like it's time that we can all go home, please intervene. And also, if anyone needs to leave while I'm talking, that's also totally fine. I won't be offended. Cool. So my story is, the first half is about a long season of mental illness, and then the second is about a long season of healing. And I'm just really hoping I get to talk a bit about the healing, but in case we run out of time for that, I'm going to start with the end. I just thank you, Greg, for sharing that story of the butterfly today, because that's a big part of my story. And actually, God showed me last year that I'd been in like a chrysalis, and actually these past sort of 6 years of healing I've been experiencing were like a chrysalis, and I knew I was going to eventually emerge from that as a butterfly. And actually last summer, I went to a dance summer camp or summer school with a Christian dance company. And in one of the sessions, I actually felt I was birthed, which might sound strange, but recently a big part of my story has been God's revealed to me that I experienced trauma when I was born. I experienced birth trauma. That's something I could never have known if he hadn't revealed it to me. But he's just shown me that. And during that session, it was like I was reborn. And he put that right. It was hard. It's been hard to grapple with, because I thought that's my whole experience of life has been after my birth. But he showed me that actually he made me good and perfect in my mother's womb, and actually the birth was healable. So, and I feel like he's done that. And actually, during that session, when I was being reborn, as it were, and God was healing that, I knew I'd emerged from that chrysalis. And I then went to the park. It was this beautiful park called Beddington Park. And I went to this beautiful park, and I just looked, and I saw a butterfly sitting on a leaf, and it was. I'm gonna have to put this down to show you. Just doing that, sitting on the leaf. And I just watched this butterfly, and I just knew that God was kind of showing me that I'd emerged from this tunnel of healing. And then the butterfly started flying, and I started dancing with it, and it landed on me. And I danced with the butterfly, so that was pretty cool. And I just felt like, let's claim that. Let's claim that I've emerged as a butterfly. And anyway, so that's the end of the story. So anyone who needs to go now knows what happens at the end. Cool, I'm going to have a sip of water. Sorry, bear with me. Cool, okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm not a very confident speaker, but bear with me. So I'm just gonna start by giving a little bit of context, just for how my journey started. So I grew up in a Christian home. I had the most loving, supportive parents I could have asked for. They are Christians, and they took us to church growing up. And I always believed in God and had a relationship with him. Just need to breathe. We went to quite a traditional sort of Church of England country parish church, and I'm not convinced that I ever really heard the gospel taught until I was 13, and I went on a Christian summer camp. And then I heard the gospel taught really clearly, and it just completely blew my mind. For the first time, I understood why Jesus had died, and I had never really realized why that was before. And I realized it was about grace and not about works, not about what I do. So that was amazing, and it sort of changed my perception of everything, really. But anyway, my teenage years were a huge struggle in pretty much every respect. I became extremely introspective, struggled hugely just with the pressure of school, and it was a real battle. And every year I'd go to camp and feel like I needed to become a Christian again, because I felt like spiritually it just felt impossible to be a Christian at school. Anyway, I then left school, had a gap year, and did a Christian gap year thing, and felt like I was really living out my faith for the first time, but also just living life properly for the first time. I feel like up to that point, it had just all been work and stress. So once I kind of discovered there was more to life, I didn't want to let go of that. And I arrived at university just excited, really, for life. I'd worked my guts out through school to get to Cambridge, and I had this idealistic notion that once I got there, I would be living this intellectual, creative idyll, philosophizing over cups of tea with others on a similar pursuit for meaning and truth. He could have probably told me that wasn't going to be how it was, but there was some of that. My first year was a roller coaster of amazing new experiences. I had an amazing church, was plugged into every aspect of the Christian Union, became co-leader of my college group. I suddenly had hundreds of like-minded friends, having always struggled socially at school. And I was so determined to keep stress at arm's length that as I had spent my teenage years being stressed and knew it wasn't worth it anymore, life was better. But instead of having the time and space I'd hoped for to develop creatively and intellectually, in terms of the pressure, I found it was just like school, but worse. Just relentless demand to produce work, essay after essay, and I'd sort of be just about grappling, getting to the end of one, and then the next one was due. Deadline after deadline, and an endless amount of reading to do in between. I scraped through my first year, managing to keep a bit of a work-life balance, but by second year, the wheels had started to come off. My tutors were on my back for work, and I was starting to sink. Fear came in that this new amazing life I was experiencing was slipping away. And I knew I couldn't salvage this by myself. So being a Christian, I prayed. I was already in the habit of spending time reading the Bible and praying each morning. And up till that point, it had mostly always seemed fruitful and strengthening for my relationship with God. So I continued to do this. But the prayer became more fervent, more urgent. I would fall on my knees before God as soon as I got up in the morning and pour out my anxieties and plead for help. And just to say briefly, I know Ellie has just shared, and a lot of these things could be really helpful for most people, and to some extent, at the beginning it was helpful for me. But I suppose maybe my story is just for, just to say, yeah, I guess, I don't know, there's maybe a very small percentage of people who actually that ends up not helpful for. So don't want to contradict anything that she's recommended, but this is just how things worked out for me. Yeah, so I don't know at what point this became unhealthy, but gradually and imperceptibly, this action of praying itself became the means of diffusing the stress and anxiety I was feeling. And you may be thinking, well, what's wrong with that? It's like we're told to pray when we're anxious, Philippians 4. And that verse has been, at the back of my mind a lot. But the trouble is that if we're doing an action to diffuse anxiety, that's how compulsions are born. Because if you do something either physically or mentally to neutralize feelings of anxiety, then that's a compulsion. For me, more and more, the prayer was driven by feelings of anxiety. And the process of praying would neutralize it. And the trouble with compulsions is that ultimately they feed the anxiety rather than dissipating it. You might feel some temporary relief, but then the feelings will come back stronger. It got to the point that I was praying in my head in response to every slight feeling of worry, doubt, or uncertainty. I felt vulnerable and exposed when I wasn't praying, at risk of going off on my own, trying to do things in my own strength without leaning on God. Even thinking or reading felt like dangerous territory if I wasn't constantly asking God to help me in it. So trying to do an English literature degree or any degree under these conditions was pretty impossible. I would read half a sentence, have an intrusive thought or feeling, pray to diffuse it, then reread that same sentence. So I could barely get through a page, and yet I had no idea what was wrong with me, or that I was unwell, or that the way I was thinking wasn't normal Christian practice, because it had all just developed really imperceptibly. And of course, when I voiced my concerns to friends that I might be praying too much, the answer I got was, but that can't pray too much, Lizzie, That all sounds really good, I would spend night after night in the library or in my room trying to piece out some work to hand in. My director of studies just wrote me off as lazy, and I believed her. I just thought if I worked a bit harder, maybe I would salvage things. There was no support from anyone, just threats about needing to start delivering. So eventually I had a big deadline that I was told I had to meet, or that would be it. I knew it was my last chance. I spent a whole night just trying to do something about it, but it was hopeless. By this point, sort of 3 years in, my tutors had started to realize that I might be unwell. So they told me to go home and get well and come back when I was better. Unfortunately, that was easier said than done. Later that year, I saw a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with religious OCD. To me, this sounded like a very secular diagnosis. And I thought, of course, medical professionals who don't believe in God are going to think I'm crazy for talking to God and caring what he thinks about me. So I found that very difficult to kind of accept, I suppose, that diagnosis. I knew I wasn't functioning well, but I couldn't understand how this could be connected with my relationship with God, because the illness had so fused with my faith, and I knew my faith was real and true because I'd experienced God and I knew him to be true. So it was impossible to distinguish what was real and what wasn't. I became more and more unwell and would have crashing feelings of guilt and fear. And needless to say, my perception of God, his character, and how he felt about me had become extremely distorted. The God I was relating to was not God anymore, but a distant, angry, threatening figure of my own making, born out of my anxiety. The trouble is, the feelings were so real. And so why did I feel so much fear and guilt if God wasn't angry with me? But all my energy was spent into trying to appease this and maintain my standing with him. I'm just going to try and speed up a bit through the rest because it's... but essentially, I just got more and more ill. And things came to a head when one day I actually thought I had lost my salvation and fallen away from Jesus. And I had a complete breakdown and was forcibly admitted to psychiatric hospital. I was there for several months, like Ellie. And it was a really dark time, just characterized by mental torment a lot of the time and just feeling completely trapped because there was no way out. And even suicide wasn't an answer because that's what I was most scared of was hell, basically, and displeasing God. So it was just, kind of torture. And I stopped eating as well, and it wasn't looking good at all. And the doctors actually told my parents I may never get better. Just praise God, through a mixture of sort of medication and psychology, eventually I was able to start distinguishing delusions from reality. Providentially, the psychologist I was assigned in the second hospital was a Christian, which meant I could trust him when he told me to stop praying. And eventually I was persuaded that I needed to actually stop praying, reading the Bible, and going to church in order to get well. And I did this for a year because my brain needed the time and space to create new neural pathways and heal. So I suppose this is just a very small caveat to, the usual advice we'd give to Christians is in terms of preaching to themselves. For me, repeating verses to myself was an obsession, and I would constantly be, saying to myself, there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But actually, that was a compulsion as well, and it just would diffuse the anxiety only for it then to increase. It wasn't that I didn't know the truth in my head either. And I had Christian friends who would preach the gospel to me, and I would feel a huge wave of relief. But then, but then immediately the illness would take hold again, and I would be sort of back in that cycle. So what did help? Well, as I say, the medication, the therapy, and the first couple of times I dared to question the need to pray in response to feelings of guilt and fear were terrifying. I felt like I was going to die eternally by resisting God, but I didn't. And this created a virtuous cycle of being emboldened more and more to challenge my thoughts and feelings and not respond to them in the same way as I had been doing. And as I challenged them, they gradually started to diminish. It was very slow, 1 step forwards, 4 steps back. But when I look back now, I can see that my healing and the speed of it was miraculous. Within a year of being discharged from hospital, I was living on my own again in London and studying English part-time at Goldsmiths because studying English was still unfinished business and hadn't quite been put off yet. 5 years later, maybe. But anyway, so that's kind of the story of my illness and the kind of initial healing. I want to just really, really briefly say that this last season, essentially what happened was I went to Focus. This was 7 years later. even though I'd recovered a lot mentally, physically, I was still really battling. I couldn't hold a job because of chronic fatigue and all these other things. So there was just so much deep healing that had to take place. And that's basically what's been happening the past 5 years. Someone prayed for me at Focus, and God just intervened in a way that he hadn't before, ever. And he took me back during that prayer session to when I was in psychiatric hospital, and just gently, step by step, put his finger on the trauma and the lies I'd been believing and just healed them one by one. After that session, I thought, okay, that's that, I'm healed. But that was actually just the start of a 5-year, 6-year process, which I'm still just emerging from, really. As I mentioned, so much of it was about really deep trauma. And I think a lot of my OCD was actually born out of the separation anxiety of having had that trauma from birth, which, just left me with really, really deep separation anxiety, and actually changed the way I related to God, and meant I could never really trust that I belonged to him and that I was his. And a lot of this healing I've had since since coming to All Saints. And actually the first time I walked into All Saints was in 2018. Joanna prayed for me at the end of the service. And there's no going back from Joanna praying for you at the end of the service. But I was flooded with the Holy Spirit in a way I'd never experienced before. And that happened again and again and again while I was here. And every Sunday, something like that would happen. And I had deliverance ministry, which was also a huge part of my journey. And it was all quite noisy, which a lot of you know. But essentially, I just wanted to say that the healing for me ended up needing not to be cognitive. And God bypassed my brain in order to minister to my spirit in a way that impressed the truth upon my being in a way that kind of intellectual reasoning or Bible reading never could, because that had become so distorted for me. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, really, I think, for now. But thank you all who have been on the journey with me, and thanks, Greg, for letting me share.